Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, I thought that I would give my little fight breakdown, my fight review, and my fight analysis of the fight that just recently occurred between Mr. Teofimo Lopez and also Mr. Sandor Martin. Now, unfortunately, because of certain things going on overall or me just being a little bit busier. I overall was not able to put out a fight prediction, and on top of that, I actually had forgot that this fight was even happening pretty much until about yesterday. So unfortunately, I was not able to put out a fight prediction. But if you were going to ask me who I was going to predict to win this fight, I did predict Teofimo Lopez to win this fight by unanimous decision. And at first, I was going to go with Teofimo Lopez by stoppage against Sandor Martin. But I eventually thought, well, you know what? Teofimo Lopez is still adjusting when it comes down to it. On top of that, Sandor Martin, he is overall a very quick opponent because Jose Pedraza was supposed to be the original opponent. And this overall, of course, is a guy that is coming in on short notice. And of course, a short notice fighter always has a little bit of a tough time, coming in. But Teofimo Lopez, of course, was going to have a little bit of a tough time because he completely trained for a different fighter. But anyways, when it comes down to it overall, once again, for those of you that did not hear the results, Teofimo Lopez ended up winning this fight by split decision. I personally thought that it should have been by unanimous decision. I personally did not have the fight, at least in my opinion, very particularly close. I had Sandor Martin maybe winning 2 rounds in this fight, maybe three if you wanted to be a little bit generous. And I might have some people that take a look at me and say, "You're crazy. What are you talking about?" But I just really didn't see what Sandor Martin really did in the fight to make it that particularly close. Now, don't get me wrong, this was a competitive match. This was a competitive fight. Just because a fight is competitive or just because it has certain competitive moments does not mean that the fight is very particularly close, at least in terms of the all-around scorecards. There was competitive moments, excuse me, in the Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao fight. That does not mean that the fight was very particularly close. I thought that Floyd very clearly won the fight. There was competitive moments overall in the Canelo Alvarez, versus I believe Caleb Plant fight. That fight still, in my opinion, was not particularly close. It just is what it is. It was competitive in spots, but Canelo very clearly was winning the fight. And overall, I thought that Teofimo Lopez. Now, did I think that he looked overall his best? No, but to be honest with you, overall, maybe this was his best, and some people may be a little bit confused by what I'm stating there. A lot of people, of course, say that a fighter does not look their best overall when they don't look that great in a certain fight. But is it really that Teofimo Lopez didn't look his best in this fight because Sandor Martin is a little bit of a fighter that Teo was not used to facing, and on top of that, Sandor Martin was coming off of great motivation from the Mikey Garcia win. And of course, he was a fighter on short notice, so Teo maybe was going to have a little bit of problems with him, excuse me, in the first place. But when it comes down to it, is it really overall those reasons, or is it really just because this is who Teofimo Lopez is? And Teofimo Lopez, in my opinion, although he's a very gifted athlete and he clearly has boxing skills, he is a flawed fighter. And one of the flaws that I see from him is that he does not tend to have great defense. It's not that he has no defense, but a lot of the times he goes in there with his hands down, and overall his head movement, in my opinion, could be a little bit better. He's not someone that is very, very stiff. But Teofimo Lopez needs to be taught that he needs to keep his hands up overall at all times, or at least overall throughout the majority of the fight. Teofimo Lopez is one of those fighters, a lot like George Kambosos, and this is the reason why I predicted Devin Haney to beat George Kambosos so soundly. Because Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos, they have almost the exact same style. They a lot of the times overall will keep their hands down and they will try to lead you in overall with certain punches. But if they get a certain very slick defensive fighter and a fighter overall that can fight on the back foot and also is not afraid to exchange with them, they're going to have a little bit of problems. Teofimo Lopez almost reminds me of a mix of Danny Garcia and a mix of Prince Nassim Hamed. And for those of you that don't remember who Prince Nassim Hamed was, he was a very physically gifted athlete and somewhat of a decent boxer throughout the 1990s. And at one point in time, I believe he was looked at as one of the top pound for pound fighters. But when he was finally in there with the fighter, all in all, now it could have been also because Prince Nassim, he didn't necessarily look physically his best. He looked a little bit drained, in my opinion, in that fight against Marco Antonio Barrera. But was it really overall that, or was it really that he finally got in the ring with a fighter that knew how to counter him? It was kind of the same thing with Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos. Now, once again, in my opinion, this fight certainly was not a robbery. I really don't even know why it was a split decision. I thought that Sandor Martin maybe won 3 rounds at most. I thought that once again he made it very competitive. He hit Teofimo Lopez with some very decent shots. He even managed to knock him down, in my opinion, twice. But of course, one was not called a knockdown. I believe in round 7 because the referee called it a slip, which I get to a degree. Someone looked, but on the replay, no, it was a knockdown. But anyways, overall, besides the point, when it comes down to at least somewhat, Teofimo Lopez overall, when it comes to Sandor Martin, I don't think that he really did anywhere near enough to win the fight. He clearly was very defensively responsible, and Teofimo Lopez overall, he clearly had a very hard time landing on Sandor Martin flush, but Teofimo Lopez clearly was the busier fighter. And on top of that, I would say that Teofimo Lopez, that he probably landed more power shots, not always to the face or the head necessarily, but a lot to the body. And a lot of things with body punches, especially if you're a fighter that is fighting on the back foot and you don't tend to throw a lot, which is exactly what Sandor Martin did in this fight, and that was a part of the reason why I personally predicted Teofimo Lopez to win this fight by unanimous decision. Unfortunately, I can't prove it because overall I did not put out my fight prediction, but I did predict Teofimo to win this by unanimous decision. I thought that it was going to be a little bit more of a dominant performance for Teo than what it was, but I can't necessarily say that I'm surprised because a lot of the same faults that I've seen from Teo in the past, they pretty much showed up here. And Andre Ward, he stated that I don't know why Teofimo's not making these certain adjustments. He has the boxing IQ to do it, so I don't know why he's making it. Well, I don't know if Andre Ward necessarily meant to say what he said, or overall, maybe they're just hyping up Teofimo because he's one of their bigger prodigies or one of their bigger stars. But Teofimo Lopez, after what I've seen in this fight, in the Lomachenko fight, in the George Kambosos fight, this pretty much is who Teofimo Lopez is. And once again, I think that he's a very decently talented fighter. I think that he very clearly overall has great physical ability. He has great power. He has decent speed when it comes down to it. He's a great athlete. And he does have decent decent boxing ability. But at the end of the day, I think that his defense overall is a little bit too leaky. I think that his head movement could be a little bit better. And Timothy Bradley also brought up a point that I would bring up as well. Teofimo Lopez is another one of those fighters that worries way too much overall about landing the good power shot, and also throws overall certain punches to where they're just 1-2s, which a lot of the times cannot be a problem or would not be a problem. But when overall certain times when you have a boxer like a Sandor Martin or something like that, you can't just throw 1-2 punches. There's a saying overall, once again, that certain people in boxing say, sometimes overall you have to box the fighter and you have to fight the boxer. And Teofimo Lopez, he fought the boxer enough in this fight and Sandor Martin to win because he went to the body a certain amount of times and still, in my opinion, pulled out the majority of the rounds. I scored it 8 rounds to 2 once again personally. But at the end of the day, the performance, in my opinion, certainly could have been better. Or maybe it couldn't have because, once again, Teofimo Lopez seems to have the same faults that I've seen from the George Kambosos fight. I think that his head movement could be a little bit better, and his defense certainly could be better. His hands are down overall pretty much from his face the whole entire time. And really, if we take a look at Teofimo Lopez, I was saying this about both himself and Devin Haney. We're going to truly find out how good or great they are when they move up to the 140/147 pound division, because then they're going to be fighting fighters that are very, very similar in size to their own. And Teofimo Lopez right now, he is still dealing with fighters that are more similar in size, and you can tell that right now that it's a little bit of a shock. Now, will he get better from this performance? We'll have to see. Now, apparently, Teofimo Lopez stated that he wanted Josh Taylor after this fight. Excuse me. Do I believe that he would beat Josh Taylor after this performance? Absolutely not. Not if the best version of Josh Taylor shows up. I just think that his defense is too good. I think that Josh Taylor overall would make Teofimo Lopez very uncomfortable. And I think that he's the all-around more skilled fighter of the two. Now, the fights that I would like to see Teofimo Lopez in next, perhaps maybe against a Jose Zepeda, maybe overall against someone like, if I had to think about it, maybe a Jose Ramirez, but even that fight might be a little bit too much for Teofimo Lopez because Teofimo is going to have to work on his defense. It just is what it is. And also to talk about another fighter that probably will eventually go up to 140 pounds, Devin Haney. Do I think that he would beat Devin Haney after this performance? No, I don't. I think that Teofimo would overall. I think that he would give Devin Haney his problems because Devin Haney, in my opinion, has a little bit of a leaky defense as well. But one thing I'm going to give Devin Haney credit for is this. When he needs to throw combinations, overall he throws combinations. When he needs to fight on the back foot or the front foot, he does that. Devin Haney, in my opinion, even though there are certain faults in his style as well, he has a higher boxing IQ than what Teofimo Lopez does because he can do overall certain things, at least with the pace that Teofimo Lopez cannot do. He has a very big problem overall really adjusting the pace, and we've seen that a little bit in the Lomachenko fight. We've certainly seen it in the George Kambosos fight, and we also seen it a little bit in this fight as well. So we'll overall see what ends up happening with Mr. Teofimo Lopez a little bit later on. It will be very particularly interesting. I once again thought that Teofimo Lopez was going to win by unanimous decision. I ended up being somewhat correct. Teofimo ended up winning, but it was a little bit more competitive than what I thought it was going to be. To be quite honest with you, I thought that Sandor Martin, when it came down to it, I thought that he pretty much was just going to be a fighter that was going to be phased out pretty much after this fight. I thought that Teofimo was going to dominate him, but I'm not really surprised with the way that it happened. Sandor Martin ended up being a little bit better than what I thought. I didn't predict Sandor Martin to win the fight like someone like a Southpaw or, TV, or like that of an Aki TV. And more than likely that decision was made because they overall are trying to make Teofimo Lopez look bad. And don't be surprised when those certain channels say that this was an alleged robbery. It was not a robbery at all. Sandor Martin overall pretty much did a lot of running on the back foot. And I am not a person all in all that likes to say that a fighter ran, but he did a lot of stuff on the back foot overall, and he really did not have anywhere near enough offense. He avoided a lot of punches, but in my opinion, he didn't get his offense anywhere near enough in there. So it just is what it is. But congratulations to Mr. Teofimo Lopez. We're going to see how truly good or great that he is within these next few years. It's going to be very interesting. The Regis Prograis of the world, the Jose Zepedas, the Jose Ramirez's, the Josh Taylors, the Devin Haney's. We're going to see if Teofimo Lopez can beat any of those guys. It's going to be very particularly interesting. But he looks very flawed in this fight, and in my opinion, he probably is going to have to add another trainer to his corner because someone needs to really teach him overall, in my opinion, to keep his hands up the majority of the fight. But it is what it is, or some decent defensive maneuvers. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.